My mother-in-law spent 4 years trying to end my marriage. She was patient. She was methodical. She had access to everything: our home, our finances, my husband's history, his fears, his soft spots. She knew exactly which thread to pull and how slowly to pull it, so no one would notice the unraveling until it was too late. She almost succeeded. I want to be very clear about something before I tell you how this ends. I am not a dramatic person. I don't enjoy conflict. I am an accountant. I process information, I identify patterns, and I act when I have sufficient evidence. By the time I acted, I had 4 years of evidence, and I use every single piece of it. My husband's name is David. We met at work, dated for 2 years, and got married on a Saturday in October. By every measure, it was a good marriage, the kind built on actual compatibility rather than chemistry that burns out in 18 months. His mother's name is Margaret. She arrived at our wedding 40 minutes late, sat in the front row without being asked to, and gave a toast that managed to mention David's ex-girlfriend by name 3 times without once mentioning me. I decided at that moment that Margaret was a woman who communicated exclusively through plausible deniability. Everything she did could be explained away. The toast was just reminiscing. The front row was a misunderstanding. The lateness was traffic. I filed it away and said nothing. That was my first mistake. Not because I should have confronted her, but because I didn't start documenting sooner. Margaret lived 40 minutes away. She called David every day, sometimes twice. She had a key to our house that David had given her before we married, and that I, foolishly, never asked him to retrieve. She had opinions about everything: where we should live, whether we should have children, what David ate for lunch, and the fact that I worked long hours. She never expressed these opinions directly to me. She expressed them to David, constantly, privately, persistently. And David, a man who loved his mother and had spent his entire childhood being told that her moods were his responsibility, absorbed them the way he absorbed everything she gave him, without question and without telling me. I discovered what Margaret was actually doing 14 months into our marriage. I came home early from a work trip. Margaret's car was in the driveway. I let myself in quietly because I was tired and didn't want to perform cheerfulness. I heard her voice from the kitchen. She didn't know I was there. What she said in those 4 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about my marriage. And I stood in the hallway and I listened to every word. Margaret was telling David that I was cold, that I had always been cold, that the way I spoke to him at dinner the previous week, she had been there, she had watched, was the way a woman speaks to a man she doesn't respect. She said she had tried, she had really tried, but she couldn't pretend anymore that she thought this marriage was good for him. She said she had spoken to his Aunt Carol, who agreed. She said David deserved someone who made him feel valued, not like a footnote in his own house. David said, "Mom, please." He didn't say she was wrong. I stood in that hallway for 4 minutes. Then I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the notes application on my phone. I typed, November 14th, kitchen, what I heard, verbatim. And I kept going. Over the next 34 months, I documented 112 incidents. I noted dates, times, content, and witnesses where applicable. I noted the calls I could hear through the bathroom wall when David thought I was asleep. I noted the Christmas dinner where Margaret served everyone a dish she knew I was allergic to and told me she had forgotten, and the Easter where she introduced me to her friends as David's first wife. As a joke, she said, laughing. I noted the morning I found our joint bank account had a new authorized user, Margaret, added by David at her request, For emergencies, he said. And the afternoon I discovered she had transferred $4,000 to her personal account for a home repair she had never mentioned. I noted all of it, quietly, without telling David, without confronting Margaret. I was building a case. I had learned very early in my career that the moment you reveal what you know is the moment your leverage disappears. Margaret had spent 4 years operating on the assumption that she was invisible to me. I let her keep that assumption. The $4,000 transfer was the last entry in the document. I did not confront Margaret. I did not confront David. What I did was make 2 phone calls and send 1 email. The 2 phone calls were to a family lawyer and to a forensic accountant who owed me a professional favor. The email was to Margaret. It had no text in the body, just a subject line. It said, "We need to talk. Tuesday, alone. Don't tell David." Margaret arrived at our house on Tuesday at 11 in the morning. She was dressed as if for a social occasion. She always dressed as if being watched. She brought flowers, which I found interesting. I made coffee. I set the flowers in water. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same kitchen where she had stood 14 months into my marriage and told my husband I was cold. And I put a folder on the table between us. The folder contained 37 printed pages. I told her I was going to speak, and that she was going to listen, and that when I was finished, she could respond. She started to say something. I said, "Margaret, listen." She listened. I walked her through the document chronologically. I read her the notes from November 14th. I showed her the bank records, the authorized user edition, the transfer, the paper trail the forensic accountant had spent 4 days tracing. I showed her the email chain I had discovered between her and David's Aunt Carol, forwarded to me inadvertently by Carol herself during a family group message mishap, discussing whether David's marriage could be redirected before they had children. I told her that I had spoken to a family lawyer, that the $4,000 transfer, made without my consent from a joint marital account, met the legal threshold for financial misconduct, that I had not yet decided whether to pursue it, but that the decision was entirely mine. I told her that I had also not yet spoken to David. I let that sentence sit in the air between us for a long moment. Then I told her what I wanted. I wanted the key to our house returned by Friday. I wanted her daily calls to David reduced to 3 times per week, at times that did not overlap with our evenings. I wanted a written acknowledgement, nothing formal, just a personal note, that the $4,000 had been borrowed and would be returned within 60 days. And I wanted her, the next time she was in a room with David, to tell him, unprompted, genuinely, one true thing she valued about his marriage. I told her these were not negotiable. I told her that the folder had a digital backup stored with my lawyer, and that my lawyer had instructions for what to do with it if our marriage ended within the next 3 years under circumstances that benefited her. Margaret sat across from me for a long time without speaking. Then she picked up the flowers she had brought and put them back in her bag. I thought for a moment that she was going to leave without saying anything. Instead, she looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time, and said, "You've been planning this." I said, "For 34 months." She left without the coffee. The key was on my kitchen counter by Thursday. The $4,000 was returned in 2 installments over 60 days, exactly as agreed. And the calls dropped to 3 times a week. And 6 weeks after our Tuesday meeting, at a Sunday dinner at Margaret's house, she turned to David in the middle of a conversation and said, without being asked, without it being prompted by anything, that she thought he had made a good choice, that I was a steady person, that steady was underrated. David looked at her like she had spoken in another language. He didn't know what had happened. He still doesn't. I have never told him about the folder. Margaret and I are not friends. We are not going to be friends. We are two women who have a detailed and precise understanding of what the other is capable of, and we operate accordingly. She comes to dinners. She is polite. She has not, in the 14 months since our Tuesday meeting, said a single thing to David that I would classify as interference. She asks about my work with what appears to be genuine curiosity, which I return with what appears to be genuine warmth. We are performing a functional relationship for the benefit of a man we both love, in different ways, for different reasons. It works. David has noticed that things are better. He's mentioned it twice, that his mom seems more relaxed, that the tension he used to feel at family events has eased. He attributes it to time. He thinks people just settle into things eventually. I let him think that. The folder still exists. My lawyer still has a copy. The instructions are still in place. I don't expect to need it again. But I'm an accountant. I don't close files just because things are going well. I close them when I'm certain they're finished. I'm not certain yet. If you've ever had to manage a person who is trying to manage you, someone with access, with patience, with plausible deniability on every single move, I want to hear it. Because what I learned in 34 months of documentation is that the most dangerous people are not the ones who attack you. They're the ones who make you feel slightly, persistently wrong about yourself until you can't remember what you actually thought before they started. Margaret almost made me forget. Almost. One more thing. 3 weeks after our Tuesday meeting, I was going through some old boxes in the back of our closet, reorganizing, as I do every few months. I found a card, handwritten, from Margaret to David, dated 3 weeks before our wedding. I won't reproduce the whole thing, but the last paragraph said, "If you marry her, I think you'll regret it. I think you know that. I think that's why you haven't told her yet about the thing with Sarah." I don't know what the thing with Sarah was. I have never asked David. I put the card in the folder, and I closed the drawer. Some information is more useful as leverage than as knowledge. I am, above all things, an accountant.